It's a boring day at work when two robbers try to hold us up, but when I recognize one of them I know I'm about to be in serious danger. I, 23 currently work at a crappy little convenience store in the Midwest as an assistant manager, and we got robbed last night by two guys. They had guns, and it was the most terrifying experience of my life. But the thing is, I recognized one of them. I didn't say anything. I just did what he asked and tried to not get shot. And now I don't know what to do about it. Because I didn't tell the cops that I knew who he was. And I have very specific reasons why. The robbery happened at about 11. I was just getting ready to close out my shift and switch over to the night manager Dave. Dave wasn't there yet, but 3 of the employees were. There was only one customer in the store. Some guy in the back who was taking forever to make up his mind on flavor of nuts. The 2 guys busted in wearing black ski masks and dark hoodies, and immediately put their guns in our faces. I noticed that the guy in the back had disappeared from view. He ducked down under the shelves and the robbers hadn't noticed him. I was the one behind Josh's cash register. I was just about to take it back to the office to count down for the night. Maxine was relieving him, and she just walked back in from putting her stuff in the back only to see a gun shoved in her assistant manager's face. The thing is though, they didn't see her until she let out a blood-curdling scream, which got only louder when it caused the second robber to accidentally shoot into a display of potato chips. "Dude, what is your deal?" the robber in front of me said, his buddy replying with an ashamed sorry. But there was something in the sound of that sorry that seemed very familiar to me. There was a lisp, and something else I couldn't put my finger on, at least not at first. For a long time it seemed like nothing happened, and then the guy in front of me loudly demanded the other to point his gun at her. By that point I had all the money on the counter anyway, even stacked in neat little piles all facing the same way. Then the guy who seemed so familiar said something else. I wasn't sure what it was at first because everything happened so fast, but I realized that it was, "Hey, there's a guy back there." And it seemed like after that there was only the gunshot and both of them running away, leaving half the money on the counter. The familiar guy had shot at the guy hiding in the back, but thankfully everyone was okay. It was definitely not a move approved of by his buddy, based on him calling him an idiot as they ran out. We all stood there shaking for a minute before I called the police, who were there in a matter of minutes. The customer in the back was so freaked out that I had to convince him to stay. He was in no condition to be driving anyway. But as we were standing around waiting for them, I suddenly realized who the guy with the lisp was. I'll call him Seth Smith, and I went to junior high with him. I of course couldn't be 100% sure. The guy had on a mask and a hoodie after all. And while just a few words wouldn't be much to go on for most people, for Seth Smith it was all I needed. Seth Smith was mercilessly bullied back in those days, and I'm more than ashamed to admit that I was one of his main tormentors. I can't lie, I was a total jerk in my youth, teasing everyone that I saw as even the slightest bit weaker than me. I wish I could tell you that I was just hanging out with the wrong crowd and that other kids were just a bad influence on me, but it was the other way around. I guess you could say that I had one excuse though. I didn't come up with my terrible behavior all on my own. Kids learn their behavior from somewhere, and just like all kids, I learned mine from home. Because my dad was a bit of a bully himself, you see. And there was no shortage of mocking and humiliation going on in my household of 3 boys and 1 girl. Of course, my sister was spared all of it because she's a girl, but I seemed to get the most of it for reasons I still can't figure out. But it led me to act out at school is all I can figured. And poor kids like Seth Smith had to suffer the consequences. I guess that type of attitude hasn't gotten me very far in life either. But if that guy was in fact Seth, I'm doing a heck of a lot better than he is. And there really is only one way to find out for sure if that is him, which would be for the cops to find and arrest him. But that would have required me to tell them who I thought he was. It's not like the cops would go banging on Seth Smith's door just because I said this robber sounded like him though, right? But if Seth had a record, maybe that would be enough for them to do it. My mind was going in 1,000 different directions at once and all I knew was that I suddenly felt insanely guilty for what I'd done, for how I treated Seth Smith all those years ago. So I decided to keep my mouth shut about it. I didn't even tell the cops the guy had a lisp, although Josh definitely noticed and did. The poor customer was so shaken up that he had to be taken to the hospital to be sedated, and there was no way Maxine could work under those circumstances. When Dave got there he decided to just close up until morning. So now I'm back at home and there's absolutely no way I can sleep, and I have no idea what I should do. Should I try to look up Seth Smith and see what he's up to? See if there's any signs of him being a criminal online, like mugshots or police records? Let me know I guess, and I'll take it from there, because I'm definitely not going to just leave this one alone. Update 1. So I have an update for you all that I think you'll find intriguing to say the least. After getting a lot of helpful advice in the comments, including some from legal experts, I decided that it would be a stupid idea to just tell the cops I thought it was Seth Smith. I simply had no real evidence to back that up and it would simply lead to further trauma inflicted on him, by me of course, if he was investigated and cleared of any wrongdoing. Of course, the police wouldn't tell him my name or that I was involved. So was there fear of a reprisal from him? There definitely was if he thinks he recognized me like I think I recognized him. Maybe that's why he accidentally shot the gun. It was when he recognized his childhood tormentor. This led me with the other option, which was Googling his real name and trying to find out as much as I could about what he's been up to in the meantime. And Seth Smith had definitely been busy. His juvenile records are sealed, of course, But everything after 18 is a matter of public record, and he racked up quite a rap sheet in the last few years, and some increasingly disturbing mugshots. Seth had been arrested for everything from drug possession to assault, and is currently out on probation for trying to steal a car. All I could think about was the idea that I had caused all of this, that it had been my bullying that made him a criminal. Of course I could take all the responsibility, but there was definitely no way that a bunch of kids mocking him every day for 3 years didn't have an influence on what he became. I didn't think that I'd find him on social media. I don't know why, but I figured he wouldn't be into that sort of thing. But to my surprise there he was. It was mostly pictures of cars or trucks, or memes that only an immature 8th grader would think was funny. Maybe he just kind of stopped maturing at the age we started bullying him. All I can say is, he looked a heck of a lot older than 22, and in most of his pictures it seemed like he hadn't slept in a year. But I decided to send him a DM anyway, just to see what would happen. He actually left that school after 8th grade, so you hadn't seen or spoken to him since. There was no way that a former childhood bully could start out a DM by trying to casually catch up, so I decided to just face the issue head on. I told him right off that bat that I knew I'd torture him for years, and I recognized and acknowledged how much pain that must have caused him. I told him that I was a different person now, and I reflected a lot on what I did and how I treated him. I felt like all of those things were true, but in the end I couldn't really be the final judge of it. I also told him that I'd like to meet up sometime and catch up. Nothing formal, just hanging out and getting a beer or coffee or whatever. I honestly didn't expect anything. If I got any response at all, I figured it would be a paragraph of all caps swears tearing me a new one for all the pain it caused him. And if that's what he'd written, I would have totally earned it, but instead he wrote back almost immediately, telling me it was good to hear from me and that he'd love to catch up. But that was all he said. As opposed to my long-winded message telling him everything I'd been up to, all he said was that he'd like to meet up. I guess I had to take that as a win, and we decided on tomorrow night at this little place called Sharky's. I have no idea what to expect, but I know what I need out of the situation. I need to somehow get him to forgive me for the way I treated him, and I need to figure out if it was him who robbed the store. I'll let you guys know what happens as soon as I can. Update 2. Sorry that I didn't get a chance to update this sooner, but I've been pretty busy trying to put my thoughts in order in a way that makes sense. So Seth and I met at Sharky's, and I'll be honest, I was a little bit tense going in. I got even tenser when I realized that it wasn't just him and I there. There was a larger guy in the booth, with intense dark eyes that I would have recognized anywhere. Seth introduced him as Hank, his friend and business associate, and said that he was just leaving. I shook his hand but avoided eye contact the best I could. I didn't want to risk him somehow recognizing me as the guy who he'd just stuck a gun in the face of days earlier. After Hank left, Seth and I had a few minutes of awkward small talk before he decided to order another round. This would be for the both of us, and we'd be having the same thing. He insisted on the Sharky special and told me it was the best tropical drink you can get in the north. I figured having one may calm my nerves, so said why not. That was a big mistake. The drink went straight to my head, and before I knew it I was begging his forgiveness for all of the terrible things I'd done to him. He looked at me like I was crazy and told me to forget about it. He said he was over all of that and that he'd been over it for a long time. But there was something in his eyes that told me he wasn't telling me the truth. And it seemed to be becoming a habit. He told me that he was in business for himself, selling crypto online, and then tried to get me to invest. Seemingly forgetting this story just a few minutes later, he then said he was going to school to become a personal trainer, and was moving out to Hollywood to try to work with celebrities. I just smiled and nodded, but I knew these were all just illusions of a deeply troubled guy. I suddenly realized that even though I'd told him everything else about my job, I hadn't told him the name of it. There's a million gas stations and convenience stores, so it would make sense that he wouldn't bat an eye at me mentioning that I worked at one. I decided to steer the conversation back to that and then gauge his reaction. And he did not disappoint. As soon as I said the name of the store, he stopped dead in his tracks and the color drained from his face. He stared straight ahead, right through me, almost like the cops were behind me and he was watching them arrive to take him in. He knew who I was. It was now plain as day. Now it was only a question of whether he was going to come clean or not. Finally, I just decided to tell him about the robbery. I brought it up casually, like it had just been some crazy thing that had happened to me. I think he was beginning to understand what I was getting at, even if he couldn't say it outright. He told me how things were not easy for him in high school, that things weren't much better for him there when it came to bullies. His home life was way worse than I ever imagined, and he eventually just fell in with the wrong crowd. There's simply no way that the horrible way I treated him had nothing to do with how he turned out. He could deny it all he wanted, but I knew the truth. I didn't know what it would take to convince him that it was me who screwed it up, but I finally realized that maybe I had less to do with it than I thought. Maybe it's even totally arrogant of me to just assume that I was important in his life, that I was the linchpin in his whole future. He then told me something that surprised me. He said that I wasn't even his biggest bully at that school, and far from the biggest bully in his life. That title was and always would be held by his dad. It was a tough thing to hear, especially considering I could relate in a lot of ways. It turns out Seth and I weren't so different after all. I should have seen that coming, I guess. I wanted more than anything to come right out and ask him if it was him who robbed the store, but I think that he and I both knew the truth. Of course it was him, but he had no reason to fear me turning him in. It was obvious that my guilt wouldn't let me. We said our goodbyes and both promised to hang out again soon, but we both know that's probably not going to happen. He knows enough not to form a relationship with the witness to one of his crimes. If this were a TV show, I'm sure he'd think I was wearing a wire and working with the feds. But Nio, this was real life and this was just me. I decided that even though I probably have enough to at least get one cop interested in looking into Seth, I'm not going to do it. What's the point of stirring up old wounds any more than I already have? And besides, there'd be no way that he wouldn't know I'd done it. And his much more intense friend probably wouldn't be very happy with that fact. I can't say I feel any less guilty about bullying Seth, and I don't even know if I did the right thing by not turning him in. But all I know is that the one thing that does feel good is making something right after all these years, even if it took an armed robbery to make it happen.